Welcome to the X-Files, Stories of Life After God. This special feature of the Life After God podcast explores stories of diverse people who have left the faith and religion they grew up with. In each episode, individuals will share in their own words how and why their worldview changed, the gains and losses associated with their religious and spiritual transition, the lessons they've learned in the process, and what their life is like now. To learn more about the X-Files and the Life After God podcast, please visit our website at lifeaftergod.org. Special thanks to Ian Gordon for the use of the theme music, The Truth Is Out There. If you would like to consider sharing your story in a future episode of the X-Files, please send a short email to ryan@lifeaftergod.org. Today on the X-Files, I speak with Alexis Record. Alexis is a former Christian, raised in a fundamentalist home. In our conversation, she recounts her experience of profound loss, her harrowing encounters with fundamentalism in Christian missions, brushes with death, extreme shaming, and misadventures in Christian education. Today, Alexis is the mother of two remarkable children, a volunteer leader at Sunday Assembly San Diego, and the author of the chapter Women v. Indoctrination in the book Women v. Religion, The Case Against Faith and for Freedom, edited by Karen Garst and published by Pitchstone Publishing. Elements of Alexis's story are being told here for the very first time and may be difficult listening, especially if you have survived abuse of any kind, but especially religious abuse. Hey, Alexis, welcome to the Life After God podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. We've been aiming to do this for a little while. I'm glad we're finally chatting.
Oh yeah, from when you came down to San Diego.
The first time?
Oh gosh, 2 years ago?
Yeah, it has to be at least 2 years ago for Sunday Assembly.
Right. Well, you were at conference too last May.
Right. Yeah.
So I saw you there because we both did workshops.
Right. And I feel like I'm, I live in Los Angeles, but I feel like I'm a member of the Sunday Assembly in San Diego.
Oh yeah, honorary member.
That's right.
I think we mentioned you like last assembly too. Like anytime there's a life happens, we'll mention it, and if you're not there, it gets mentioned anyway. And you had the humanist chaplain position, so that got announced.
Well, this is not about me. This is about you. So let's let's talk about you for a minute. So, you, like so many others, grew up in a pretty devout Christian family. Do I have that right?
Yes, very devout. And I think that's the thing that not a lot of people who know me now as Alexis Record know me. Like back then I was Alexis Conley and I loved the Lord. And I don't ever know how to explain that because now I hang out with a wide variety of people.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if they're atheist or Christian. No one really gets how deeply and truly and authentically I loved and worshiped the Lord for 30 years, 29, 30 years. And you explain it to the atheists who've been atheists their whole lives, and they just kind of cock their heads and go, oh, you must have been delusional, or, and you say it to the Christians and they go, well, you must not have been authentic. And it wasn't actually until I found the Clergy Project where I found other people like me where I could just relax and like they understood, no, you really, truly, you have to be in this 100% to go into ministry, to be a missionary. And I've been on a couple podcasts and written a bunch of blog posts, but I've never talked about the evangelical side of my Christianity or my missionary years ever really publicly before. So that was what I was talking to you about over Facebook. That's uncharted territory and makes me a little nervous, but I think I'm to the point where I want people to know about it.
Yeah.
And
well, I'm excited. I'm excited to share it. I mean, I know how frightening it can be from my own personal experience, but I also, have interviewed so many people who really do take a risk and in their own, it may not be as big of a risk out in the world as it is in their own mind. And then when they get done doing it, they're like, wow, I'm really glad I did that. Or they get people that say, and I'm sure you've had this too, people that say, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing. I thought nobody understood me, or, I thought I was alone, or, I never heard anybody tell this. You could have been telling my story. I get this all the time. People like, I thought you were talking about me. So before we get into, and I'm really excited to get into your ministry years and your experience there and what that was like. But before we get into that, I just want to jump back in time a little bit to your growing up experiences and ask you what that was like for you, whether it was pretty negative or largely positive, or a kind of a mix of both, and kind of how you grew up in the church.
Sure. So church was my life. We went to church 8 times a week, because that was twice on Sunday and also twice on Wednesday. So it might have been 9 times a week. My school was at the church. So I didn't really ever get away from not only that group of people, but that mindset, that group of doctrines. My mom was my primary caregiver, and she was very loving and amazing. And my grandma Lucy was very loving and amazing, lived like 3 minutes down the road and was at my house every day. And if we needed something like, clothes or food, a baseball glove, she would provide it. So, and her name was Lucille Record, and so I'm actually, when she passed away, I took on my kinship name, last name.
Oh, that's great.
So it's actually a family name. And then my mom passed away when I was 19.
Oh, wow.
And she died in a car accident. A reckless 16-year-old was, I think it was he'd had several accidents before that for reckless driving.
Oh my.
And this was the first one it's not even the first one that injured someone. But it messed him up. And I remember holding him after sentencing. He got like house arrest, and he was a kid.
Yeah.
But I remember holding him, and I was holding all his weight. I'm grieving, but he just was destroyed. And
I suppose he didn't have a license or anything at that point either, right? Because of his prior.
I believe, now this is all now rumor and conjecture, but it's a small town, and it was like he had a rich stepfather, was the rumor, and just kept hiding the evidence or buying him a new car, or somehow he was being facilitated, and he was like a privileged, all-American white kid, and just kept getting away with, boys will be boys mentality, and until it cost someone her life. She was on her way to teach sign language to an elderly couple in our church who had just lost their hearing, or the husband had.
Oh, wow.
And it was like they had no communication in their marriage, and that was really hard.
Yeah.
And she was going to make a left turn, and so her wheel was cranked to the left, but she had not started the left turn, one of those backcountry roads with 2 lanes. And so when he hit her from behind, because her wheels were already turned to turn left, it pushed her into it didn't push her forward, it pushed her left into a big old truck.
Oh, no.
So it was pretty instant, although the paramedic, so we're also a very religious town, or it just seemed that way to me. So while I'm holding the guy who killed my mom, I'm sharing the gospel with him. We gave him a gospel bracelet. The paramedic told me that my mom died with a smile on her face because she knew she was going to heaven. It was these are pivotal moments in my life, life-changing things. But I felt this God's presence, and it was I don't know. Before my mom was killed, I was 19, but you asked about childhood. I grew up in my church school, if you've heard of ACE, stands for Adverse Childhood Effects or Experiences. Well, our ACE stood for Accelerated Christian Education, and I was in that program almost my whole childhood. I was in public school for kindergarten and first grade, was pulled out because there was a school assignment where we had to adopt a ghost for Halloween, and it was like gigapets were the thing. So the teacher thought this would be cool. Like, you'll adopt a ghost and feed it, and it's all on paper. It's just a writing exercise. But of course, there's no such thing as ghosts unless it's the Holy Ghost. So that ghosts are demons. So our school is run by Satan. And I think this was my sister's assignment. But anyway, we both got pulled and put in the preschool program of the Accelerated Christian Education system that was started at my church that same year. And coincidentally, my pastor convinced my mom our school was run by Satan. The same time, he had this school that needed students and to pay tuition and attend.
Right.
So
how convenient.
Yes, and this is a man who was my pastor all my childhood until, teen years, where we went to a different church, and he's still part of my life, although he has Parkinson's and a bit of dementia. And so now our relationship consists of him sending me accidental Facebook messages about pictures he's accidentally taken or an accidental video he took of him watching the news, or, the other day he sent me an invitation to Messenger on Messenger. So I'm not going to confront him at this point in my life, but
right.
But he kind of ran our ACU school. And so we were taught from preschool, but really I was in second grade, all the way to graduating high school, that evolution was a lie and a conspiracy, and that God was a Republican.
Of course.
And then there was not direct messages. Like, we were taught women belonged in the home. That was direct. But we were also taught that women shouldn't be educated, which was an indirect message that you can compile from all the tiny, tiny messages that just added up over time. Like the materials never had a woman in career. And there'd be a whole book on careers you can do. And the only one that would have female pronouns would be the homemaker. And it was very androcentric language throughout. And there'd be lessons on how women should submit to men and ways to do that. Like, there'd be examples of a wife wants a pretty dress and the husband says no and she has to submit. And Esther.
This is so interesting.
Mordecai. It's ridiculous. Johnny Scaramanga did a whole PhD thesis on experiences of AC students in the UK. And
oh, really?
Yeah, it just came out last year. And he also has published papers on how it's racist and how,
Well, and Betsy DeVos
banned.
has been a big advocate of this educational system, right?
Yeah, Rebecca Klein from HuffPost did a huge, massive piece on schools getting vouchers, and ACE was mentioned, and I was actually interviewed for that. And
Anais Sharshenko was in the ACE education system. It's so funny because she also told me about the woman who wants the dress, and the husband says, we can't afford it, and then she says, okay, honey, and he's like, it's so nice when you're so submissive, thank you. I literally just heard that story from Anais not 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. And it was the water we swam in. It was the air we breathed. Sexism, and it was so normal. It was of course normal that there's another one. If you're in the kindergarten materials, and it's a teacher training manual that says how to teach these materials, and it says get a box full of daddy's things, and it will have a screwdriver, and it will have and then the box of mommy's things, and it will be an apron, and it was all gender roles. But then even the little boys and girls, the boys will want to play games and the girls will want to help mom with dishes.
Oh my.
And it was very, there's a whole book where because we learned like in these narratives, like these stories that, the characters in these stories would have these adventures and yeah, they would just naturally sit down and talk about whatever the lesson was. And then there's this whole story where we learn all about these lessons and all about science. And the only time a woman appears in all of these is at the very end when they come home from their lessons, father and son, and she goes, "You guys look exhausted from all this learning or working. Why don't I make you a sandwich?" That's it.
Oh, man.
That is woman, that is your appearance. So
yeah, and so you basically are, this is really abusive. I mean, you're denying children an education which affects the entire rest of their life. I mean, I don't have to tell you this. How
yes,
that must be something that you still live with the consequences of that. You probably think of it so often. Is that true? Does it come up for you pretty regularly?
Oh yeah. It's you ever see Bones?
Yeah.
Where Dr. Bones, I don't get that reference. That was me.
Oh.
I don't get that reference. Or I've watched, so actually kind of exciting. I start school tomorrow. I'm going back and I'm taking my first ever chemistry class because I was interviewed by Rebecca Klein for this piece on Betty DeVos and ACE. And she asked me, what are you doing? How did you make up for that lack of education? And I just kind of went, and honestly, I've watched some Khan Academy videos and I've watched Stated Clearly videos and I've read Aron Ra's book on, evolution, but I haven't really done anything to fill in the gaps, really, just enough to get by. So starting tomorrow morning at 7:55 a.m., I will be filing into a classroom with a bunch of teenagers.
Wow. Congratulations.
And learning. Yeah, thank you. I'm terrified and excited. And I've already reached out to, and I'm taking physics on Tuesday. So it's physics and chemistry, both of which I have zero, because all my science classes in ACE are God did it, right?
Right.
I memorized a chapter of the Bible every month and I memorized a verse per workbook. But I didn't actually learn real science.
And you're saying that those memory exercises aren't useful to you now?
If only there was a job that would hire an atheist who
knows the Bible really, really well.
Yeah. I mean, this is a subject that comes up over and over and over on the Clergy Project forums. What do we do now? Because it was all short-term memory also, and we didn't memorize anything else. So some of it, I had a good memory at one point, and I could apply that to college classes, because I did go to a Christian college after that.
Right.
And because when my mom was killed, she had this one wish that I go to Christian Heritage College, which was founded by Henry Morris and Tim LaHaye, from the Left Behind books and the creationism, father modern creationism. So that was her dying wish. And then we had death benefits. You kill someone, you have to pay money to the family. So we called it, I went to college on blood money, and I didn't get to choose my college. I went to the one this money paid for. It would have felt wrong to use it for a different college.
Right. Wow.
So I found, and it was okay because I had been raised to be a missionary. It was drilled into me because I could only be, as a woman, a homemaker, a mother, a missionary, or a teacher until I had children, or a teacher of a classroom my children were in, which is what my mom did. She was our, ACE doesn't have real teachers, and they discourage credentials or education. So their teachers actually if they have a degree, it can be Bible, but they don't want, because the educational system, and I use the word educational lightly, has failed every academic study ever done for decades. They don't want real teachers actually facilitating this. So they will hire supervisors. In my mom's case, she was married at 16. She didn't have an education. She'd never been to college. She was perfect. So she was the head supervisor. And then, and I had to call her Mrs. Conley. And, and so So like I had no education. And so I went to this college that gave me classes on women should submit to men and creationism. I took a whole college course on creationism.
So clearly this type of so-called education is abusive to the children that are receiving it. But the question I always have, it sounds like your mom did this completely conscientiously, truly believing she was doing the right thing. And then behind that are obviously men who know that what they're doing is harmful and complete bullshit. I just wonder where the responsibility lies in your mind.
Well, I was maybe more critical of my mom because there's so many.
Yeah, and maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe, I mean, tell me what you think. Yeah.
Well, no, because I need you to be on my mom's side here because I become her as a little missionary and I kind of need absolved of the things I did as a missionary because I did the same things adults in my life did to me growing up. And so here's the kicker. As a missionary, I personally have led over 100 people to Christ, a conversion experience using the gospel. And in the vast, vast majority of cases, I was in a position of power over the person I was converting. They were a child, or they were, I was the missionary and they were the, congregant. They were younger. Rarely were they my age or older. And in those few cases where they were, it was done the right way. I think I was on the evangelism team for a mega church. People would come to the church. You won't force them. They signed up to get more information about converting to Christianity. I went to their home. That's different. That I'm okay with. For the most part, of course, the things I said to them that convinced them to be converted were not based in truth or reality, because we like to subvert truth, give it a capital T and make it based on faith, which, faith is not a pathway to truth.
Put it out of reach of anything. All criticism.
Right. You make it unfalsifiable. So I don't feel good about what I did, but I have to understand, I have to forgive younger me for the terror I put in people, fear of hell. And there's a thing called religious trauma syndrome, and that's how it's caused. And I was part of a circle, like a complete generational indoctrination system that I perpetuated. I swallowed whole. I was not one of those people, like some people that deconverted from a major religion will say, I was always a little free thinker. And even back in Sunday school when I was 5, I asked the teacher, no, that wasn't me. I truly, truly believed it. I dealt with the cognitive dissonance by sinking into my faith. I had strong faith and it felt real. And there's a book, Karen Garst's book coming out this year, Women v. Religion. I'm chapter 3 on indoctrination, and I really got to research and study the effects of indoctrination and what it does to your brain. And it does some really real things. So like you might believe something that's bogus, but your fear of that bogus thing and your belief in that bogus thing will affect you physically in your brain's pathways and the chemicals it releases. And so the nuns, praying and monks chanting, they have similar brain chemistry. Everyone that feels like their religion is real and true, and they just know, they like 1 John chapter 5, it's true. That's that knowledge, that like experiential knowledge, that we were taught in Greek class, like, oh, this means to know, means to experience. You experience God. Experiencing God is a book that we had to study when I was missionary.
Yep, I know it. Yeah.
That is what you cling to, and that actually changes your brain. So those experiences are real in the sense that they are physically happening to your brain, but they're also universal, so that you can be in a mutually exclusive doctrine-wise religion. You can be in two opposite religions and have the same human phenomenon of deep belief, and it can affect your life. It can inspire you. It's real. So when I say I loved God and I wanted to serve him, it was so authentic at the time, but even if it was not based on anything real.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. In fact, I just had someone on my Facebook page sort of taking me to task that I couldn't criticize the Bible because only people who believe really understand what the Bible says. And so it's, it's beyond the reach of people who don't believe. And he was trying to discredit the fact that I was a believer in the past and that I had not only my own personal, as you so perfectly described, my own very real personal experience. I mean, I remember in college, and I've described this on other podcasts for people, going for a walk. I read the verse, and I believe it was in the Gospel of John, or maybe it was Mark, where Jesus got up very early before the sun rose and went out and communed with the Father. And so I would, and then I read, of course, these great saints of old who, like Moody, who barely slept, like got up at 4 a.m. to pray for 3 hours. So I really felt that's what I needed to do. And I would get up before the sun came up, and I had a full day of college coursework ahead of me. And I would go walking in the woods that were like adjoining the college and talk to Jesus as though he were walking on the path with me. And it was so real. But this guy on my Facebook page is like, no, you obviously never knew the Lord, and so I totally get like how people just they don't want to allow for any criticism of what they believe, and you're telling them like, no, I really, really believed it. It's really an amazing thing that your brain can do. Right.
Yeah. No, if there was a true believer in the world, it was me. And it was real. And Dan Barker actually has this great quote, but I'm hiding from my children in the bedroom and not by my computer. So I don't, because they're loud. But it's something like, if you have to believe it in order for it to feel real, it's not real.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the Holy Spirit is just the biggest unfalsifiable carrot on a stick. Like, you believe it and then you feel the Holy Spirit. That's your proof of the Holy Spirit. Well, it's also the proof of, a Muslim believer feeling Allah speak to her, or a Hindu believer feeling. I have actually friends who are Hindu and Muslim, and when they ask for prayers or when they talk about their religion, it's the same. It's the same as when I did. And it is universal.
You really then, like you said, like became your mom. You replicated what she did because that's what you were taught. And your mom was, as far as your mom was completely sincere in everything she did, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so were you, as you were doing what you now find reprehensible. And you mentioned a minute ago, like it's been pretty hard to forgive yourself. What's that been like for you?
Well, I think that's why this is the first time I'm really talking about it ever. And I've written so much about, my deconversion. I've been on podcasts, and this is the thing that brings me a little shame. Like, I went into other cultures, some that were influenced by the West in an unfair way.
Right.
And like Papua New Guinea, when I went with New Tribes, and we lived in a tribe, and we're learning the language and culture in order to twist it into our own. You go into other cultures and you have to change them because they're all going to hell. And just the way you view people when you think that they don't believe the magic words, so they're not going to be in heaven with you, is us versus them thinking, is the roots of prejudice. The roots of racism, the meta-analysis of all those studies done by the 3 researchers, which I mentioned in my chapter in Karen Garst's Women Be Religion book. there is a strong and undeniable link between racism and religion. And
Right.
it was us versus them. It's tribalism. It's your lizard brain going, they are different, and then amplified by God says they're different. And it makes you holy, and it makes these prejudicial thoughts holy. And, you know, a lot of people say, I became a better person after I deconverted, and goodness, if I've said that, I've heard it, and if that does not get the most pushback from believers, like, you're not better than us, or, you know, that's not what we're saying. Religion holds you back. There's an undeniable, scientifically shown through studies, link between religion and sexism. Though there's a wage gap percentage tied to it. For every, you know, percentage of religion in an area, the wage gap will go down by a measurable amount. There is an undeniable link between religion and anti-intellectualism is one way to say it, but just like, and I'm not talking IQ tests, which
Sure.
can be iffy, but like there's a part of letting go and letting God that changes your brain chemistry, that makes you less stressed. But should it always, you know, like you're in a bad situation and you like, I'm going to pray about it and not do anything anymore.
Well, and the way that Marx, the way Marx described that was like being on drugs all the time. Like if the opiate of the people was basically this idea that religion kept people passive. It kept them, as you say, low stress, but low stress often correlates then to passive and inactive and not in charge of your own destiny, not really seeking your own path, but just, like a sheep, literally, following along. And that's where corrupt leadership really wants people to be, is just in this follower mode.
Right. Yeah. And if you're a woman, that is magnified.
Yeah.
If you're a woman, it is, if you're any gender that's not like cis white male,
right.
It is, being passive is like a good believer is passive. A good believer trusts the Lord, relies not on their own understanding in all their ways. But a female good believer does the same to like those they're subordinate to. So there was a lot of abuse, like in the church, sexual abuse. There was a lot of women not being able to speak, or it is just rife. It is just maybe it's not set up for predation, but it welcomes it, and it's just the most comfy environment for it.
Wow. All the while claiming like this moral superiority. Yeah,
and then studies have shown like you're better off without it. You're better off without it.
Yeah.
You are. Like your kids are better off without it.
So
it does not make kids more altruistic. Quite the opposite.
So you were in Papua New Guinea, and I assume other places as well. And then you got out of it somehow. Lots of other
places.
Yeah. Where'd you go? Like, where were you around the world?
My very, very first trip was through Awana, and it was like a missionary training to South Africa and Swaziland.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being gone for like a month, and it was the longest I'd ever been away from my mom. And I got home, and she had just was crying and like, I missed you. I thought of you every day. And I was like, I thought of you once when I bought you this souvenir. Like I was on fire for the Lord and just thought of the Lord the whole time.
Wow.
And we did ministry until like we were bone dead tired. So the next year when Awana was like, oh, you now qualify for the extra special Next Step People program, I was on board, and they sent me to Jordan and Egypt the next summer. And that was less of a magical experience because we were still bone tired, with an addition of throwing up all the time. But our leaders were abusive, just like rife for predation. And I've never named them publicly, but Dick and Dana Metcalf were our American leaders. The local missionaries were very nice and sweet people, but the Americans they sent with us were abusive. They kept water from us. They kept food from us. I lost 20 pounds in a month.
Oh my.
And most of it was water weight.
What? In the desert?
And it's the worst heat I'd ever experienced, and we had no air conditioning. They did put a fan up while we were there. Like, it was such a second thought. We weren't allowed water though. So we weren't allowed water, and most of my throwing up was like dehydration. We weren't protected from the elements. There was a risk we had malaria. I was hit by Dana. She was just, I think, stressed, and I had left and she didn't know why. It was because my leader, who was my peer, but he was a boy, so he's my leader at the time. He had sent me to make 2 more gospel bracelets, and all the materials were upstairs. And I was like, yes, sir. And I was, I wanted to serve. I wanted to please the Lord. I wanted to please the people around me. I wanted to be a good person and a good Christian. And so I ran upstairs. I made the 2 gospel bracelets. As I'm making them, she slapped me so hard, I dropped them all. And this was just,
wow.
And then the only thing she ever said after me was she wrote, as I'm reading my Bible, like one morning, in the corner on the floor with the other people around me, she walks past me and throws a yellow piece of paper, like ripped off some yellow notebook. And I opened it up and it said, "I'm sorry." And that was it.
She couldn't even say it out loud.
She couldn't talk to me, yeah. And every day, and my mother had just been killed some months before this.
While you were out of the country?
No, she died in May, and then This was that summer.
Wow. Gosh,
and
so much is going on for you.
I'm grieving. I'm physically dying, I guess. Like, when I got home, I had my hair covered too, so I did look a little different. But I walked right past my father, who came to pick me up from the airport, and he did not recognize me. I had, it looked like I'd been punched in the face because I had, these dark circles. While I was there, another missionary, Chris, and I can't remember his last name, Anderson? Chris somebody, also a jerk from the States, not a local Egyptian or Jordanian, was super abusive, verbally abusive, yelled at us. And we were up all night because we're in charge of these, kids who are staying there to listen to the gospel, and we're sleeping with them and they don't sleep. And so we're sleep deprived. We don't have water. We're not allowed to buy our own bottled water with our own money.
What was the rationale behind not letting you have water?
It was control. It was
like a reward if you did the right thing, you got a little bit of water?
It was like they would go around the room at the end of the night and go, "What couldn't you give up for the Lord? What couldn't you sacrifice?" And I remember my answer. Everyone was like, soda or lipstick, or, my answer was female genital mutilation or something. It was like female circumcision. That was my answer because I had given up everything else. I'd given up chapstick because I didn't know if I had access to it. And I thought using it more than once a day meant I was addicted to it and loved it more than God. So I gave it up.
Chapstick.
I'd sleep on the kitchen floor, which was linoleum, because I thought I was, getting too comfortable with a bed. And what if the Lord called me to live on the jungle floor? And I was so punished for that answer, because then he went around taking away all those things. Your lipstick's confiscated, no more soda. And to me, he just gave me the nastiest look. This Dick, his name was Dick Metcalf, gave me the nastiest look, you are horrible. You said the thing that didn't work for my, taking away game, and I hate you now. And then,
wow.
He would talk to other, we were teenagers. He would talk to other teenagers about other teenagers. It was psychological torture. And the worst part was coming home and telling the men in my life, because the women had died or were dying. So I had men in my life at this point, that I had been abused, and them not believing me because I was a woman. And you don't believe the testimony of women. They wouldn't have said that, obviously. But if my boyfriend had, said he had been abused, they would have believed him. And I came home and said I was abused, and they said, you just didn't, you just misinterpreted. You need to submit yourself to authority better.
Wow.
Yeah. So control. And then after that experience, I was done with Awana, obviously. And I didn't report it for like 10 years. And when I reported it, I talked to this great person at Awana headquarters, and she was just so used to people like, this is horrible. I called her, and I'm not going to say her name, and I'm not going to say what, all happened.
Sure.
But she was a victim of sexual abuse. One of her kids was in Awana. So that's how she got this position, to talk to other victims of abuse. And mostly she was waiting for me to talk about my sexual abuse. And I didn't have sexual abuse in Awana. So she almost was like, so you weren't touched inappropriately under your clothes. You were, and she was so used to hearing those stories that got reported. Do those stories get reported to the police? I have no idea. But if she's so used to just talking to sexual abuse victims, and I know she did not report the midcaps, she told me she didn't. She's like, it was too long ago. They're not really active in ministry anymore, so we're not going to do anything.
Wow.
Well, they starved me, beat me, deprived me of water. I went home and went into the hospital. I went to my doctor, and he wanted to do blood tests and stuff. And I was so scared, because I was so dehydrated, I couldn't give blood. It was scary bad.
Wow. Yeah.
And
you
they
could
were
have died.
If they're not going to report that, people broke bones on this trip. People had, I think I threw up every day. And I was forced to work constantly. I couldn't sleep. At one point I threw up, stood up and gave a rousing message, shared the gospel. And as soon as it was done, I went and threw up again. And I credited the Holy Spirit for the strength to just get up and give the message. Not adrenaline, not, survival, just the Holy Spirit. And
wow.
Yeah, so I was done with Awana.
Yeah, I should say.
I got my citation award, which is the top honor you can get. I did my missionary service, and then I was done with them. So I tried Youth for Christ. So I spent some time in Northern Ireland, and I ended up, I loved that trip, but it was a little too woo for me, being this fundamentalist. I didn't like the faith healing or the praying or splashing holy water on church doors or, so that wasn't my scene. And then I eventually went into the interface program through New Tribes Mission, where we went to Papua New Guinea and we spent the summer there, and we did a tribal side mission and lived in a tribe out in the middle of nowhere, and learned how to learn the local culture so you can subvert it, how to learn the local religion so you can better convert them. And I used they use the chronological approach to sharing the gospel. I've used that in the States. So Africa, the Middle East, and then I spent a semester of school in Israel, just learning the Bible better. So I went to all the places in Israel mentioned in the Bible, every place except for the West Bank, area. Right. We went everywhere else.
Where the bad Palestinians live.
Yeah. Aww.
I know.
But so then I just studied the Bible, and then I graduated valedictorian from my Christian college. And I had a professor, Ron Barnes, who encouraged me to pray at least 30 to 45 minutes every day, which at the time just changed. I was all head knowledge, and this just made it even more real. So I was the Apostle Paul's I'm a Jew of the Jews. I'm a Christian of the Christians, right? I'm the top. The only way I could be better if I was male, and, because at the time I was the only girl in my seminary classes, that, the only woman. There was one other one, and she was married to another seminary student. So they were kind of going through it together for joint ministry. And that was the excuse why she was there. I was the anomaly.
They couldn't make any excuses for you. They're what's Alexis doing here?
Yeah, I was engaged. I was doing it right. I was
you were trying to become as male as you could become.
Trying.
Can a leopard change his spots? I mean, come on.
See, I knew I even when in my church growing up, I couldn't when I would speak like about my missionary trip or something, well, in the church growing up when I was little, I couldn't be behind the pulpit. So if I did speak, it had to be in a microphone off to the side, off the stage, stuff like that. So I knew like all this head knowledge I was told over and over will greatly benefit my children.
Right.
So I got the message, I need to have 1 million children because they're my mission field now, right? And I started, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm trying to go linear. I did a lot more missionary work. But those were like the pivotal
The main
moments.
one. Yeah. I also wanted to just get a bit of context. Is there a denomination that you're a part of it through all of this, or is it sort of like independent stuff? Because isn't Awana Baptist?
Yeah, we were Baptist.
Okay.
We were, but you could also do EV free or non-denom, and it was all kind of similar.
The reason I asked that is, so you describe these extreme experiences of male headship, women being totally subordinated and dominated, physical abuse, deprivation. But we're not talking about some fringe cult here. We're talking about Baptists.
Yeah.
Baptists,
yeah.
like
Protestants. Yeah.
They're the biggest group of evangelical Christians in the country, various stripes of Baptists. So like, I just want to make that point because it's not like you're in some kind of crazy sex cult somewhere where you're this is normal evangelical Christianity in mid America. Where were you located? Where was the church?
California.
No shit.
Yes, California.
Oh,
this can happen anywhere.
See, this is so important.
I tell people I was raised in a cult. If I don't know
you were right,
because what's the difference between a major religion like the one I was raised in and a cult? Size. It's funny to say, like, I had these life changing, not positive, negative life events based on not outside the main doctrines, based on the main doctrines of a major religion.
Right.
And someone will just roll their eyes like, oh, my grandma's that religion, she's fine. Okay.
Well, and there are a number of Baptists that did escape being through the worst of what you went through. I mean, Anais, that I mentioned a minute ago, was raised Seventh-day Adventist like I was. Her experience, mine was bad enough, but hers was far worse than mine just because of the context that she found herself in, which was very cultish, extremely cultish. Very
it's
similar.
Fundamentalist. It's like if you're like we were doing everything right. We were digging through the Bible and like if it was hard, if it seemed evil, like slavery or women's subordination or whatever, we would do it because those were God's words. And if your fundamentalists are wackadoodle, then your fundamentals are wackadoodle. And if you can only do Christianity, on the surface level, far away from your charter document, then there's something wrong with the core.
Right.
It is, we can judge how different people, because I'm always told it was a human error. It's human error. God's perfect. The Bible was perfect. Human error was all the cause of your, stress. And if it's not human error, it's Satan. And if it's not Satan, it's God testing you.
I know there's always some workaround, some excuse.
But it's never like the problem was the doctrines you believed. And your life decisions based on those doctrines and your beliefs based on those doctrines made your life worse and made the world around you a less tolerant, less intelligent, less altruistic, less good, less equal place to live. And I have, like, that's a burden I have now. I think, and it's inspiring to me. Like, my life now is all about making the world a better place. I'm the head of outreach for our local Sunday assembly, and we feed homeless people, and we do, those things, like we pick crops for food banks, we pack boxes, for food banks, we've helped, the least of these, all the things that I couldn't really do in church without the additional burden of converting people or judging them. Like we couldn't ever go to World Health Day and help LGBT teenagers learn about STDs, in church.
Yeah, clearly not. So do you feel like you're atoning in some way for the years that you spent converting people?
Yeah, definitely like the plot of Xena Warrior Princess. Like you do all the bad and you carry the bad with you. It never goes away and you can never really make up for it all the way, but you can kind of forgive yourself for like where you were. Like forgiving my mom and forgiving my grandma and forgiving like my ancestor, like for what happened to me, helped me realize I would have been them. Well, I was them. I had my daughter. I had her converted to Christianity when she was barely 3 years old.
Wow.
And I converted her. Like we memorized the Bible from that time she was like born practically, same as me. Like we always say, we were Christians from the womb because it felt like we were. I accepted Christ as my Savior at 3 years old because I completely knew all the ramifications, justifications, and I'd already compared all the major religions at 3. So that's totally reasonable.
Right, of course.
And so did she. And it happened, we were in the Ronald McDonald House, She had like surgery the next day and she couldn't sleep. And I had always like pushed this Jesus, like his death on the cross and what that meant. And like, I'm pushing the ideas of heaven and hell and the death of a guy and substitutionary atonement, which is, it is bullshit.
Crazy.
And it's like morally reprehensible.
It is. Yep.
And I'm pushing that on a 3-year-old who of course accepts it because mommy said it. And
this is the thing. It's not her fault.
She knows how important it is to me. She knows how like my tone changes. She knows like she has to accept it.
Right.
And that is indoctrination. If we waited till, the human brain is done developing at 25, can you imagine if people were only shared the idea of substitution, the biblical idea of, Jesus died for our sins and it kind of covered people from before he died and all those wackadoodle ideas when their brains were fully developed, when there was not relationships on the line.
Right.
Who would be a Christian? No one. Or human beings are lovely folks. So lots of people would be, but not very many.
Right. Exactly. But it's this, to me, it's back to this question I was getting at earlier, which is where does the accountability lie? Because, your daughter was doing what all sons and daughters try to do, which is to please their parents. It's like any other animal. You do a certain behavior and you get either a positive or negative reaction. And so you want to do the things that get you the positive reaction, whether it's a treat, or like training a dog or a smile from your mom, which triggers some chemical release in your brain because, hey, I did that thing and my mom smiled. I want to do more of that, and then you pass it on to your children, just as your mom passed it on to you. And eventually, some adults, wake up and realize this is not okay. And I wonder both, obviously, like how you woke up but also along as you think back over those years of abuse, were there people looking back that you now realize they knew that this was all crazy and they just perpetuated it anyway because it was in their interest? I
call it the years the locust has taken, kind of to reverse reverse a Christian saying. I wonder if my pastor, who just sent me a Facebook message, he's waving at me. That's innocuous. Usually I'll get an accidental video of like Fox News or something. Or, he's just sitting there. He pushed a button.
So he's still feeding the narrative for himself, even though he's very old.
Well, yeah, yes. And he has so many Facebook accounts because sometimes he doesn't remember how to sign back in. So he just creates a new one and it's always misspelled. Yeah. So like, I can't hold his feet to the fire, but I became pretty close with him because I did a lot of free labor for the church starting when I was very young. Like I helped move into a new building. I helped paint walls. I was little when I was like scraping scaffolding off flooring and, cleaning bathrooms, doing filing.
More
and
abuse.
He would reward me with like a trip to Long John Silver's when we were done, like hours of labor for like, $5 meal.
Ugh.
And in those meals, he would just tell me, I think he opened up to me a little more than others. And he would tell me about how he would psychologically abuse kids, like like everyone has a guilt conscience, especially believers, and how he could manipulate it by, something would happen. He wouldn't know who would do it. So we'd just take the kid he suspected or the kid who gets in trouble. Or we had one kid with obvious to me now, disabilities, like mental disabilities, put him in an office and stare him down and use these like, put him in a little chair and the pastor would be in a big chair and the pastor's a big guy and he would like yell during sermons. So he was also a little scary and get red in the face.
It's like CIA interrogation techniques.
He would stare at these kids and like until they would break and confess to anything. And we were in a school that beat children also. So I was beaten a lot.
But you don't think that he knew this was wrong? Like he was just doing what he thought was right. You don't think he knew?
I think he fully believed that he had divine right. As an adult male over children and women.
And that by even beating them, it's like you spare the rod, you spoil the child. So you're actually saving the child by beating it.
Yes. And to train up a child. That was one of our venerated texts.
Of course.
Because it would be child abuse not to put welts on someone so accelerated Christian education is a beast. You get 3 demerits, you get a detention, and 3 detentions is a beating. But a demerit can be earned from not finishing your homework because you don't understand it, which was my problem always. So I would start out every day with 1 demerit. You get another one if your dad didn't sign your homework slip. My dad was kind of a non-parent for a lot of growing up. He also worked nights. So some days I would start out my school day with 2 demerits for innocuous things I had no real control over.
Yeah.
So I have 1 demerit left. If I dropped a book during so there'd be chunks of time where you're just staring at a wall. Each student is not allowed to talk to the other ones during the school day unless you're at recess. And we're put in cubicles facing the wall, dividers between us. If we have a question about our work, we put up a Christian flag. If we need to self-score our work, because the teachers don't do anything, we'll put up an American flag. If we have to go to the bathroom, we'll put up, I forget which flag. And we're not allowed to speak. You're also not allowed to look around. So if you lean back in your chair too far, that can be a demerit if you're like labeled a bad kid and the teacher thinks that you're looking around.
Wow.
So I lived in a little prison, which was also abuse.
Yeah.
And, And it was worse when we had Mrs. Perez was our head supervisor, and she did not like me. So if you're not liked as a child in this system, you get more demerits. So I got more beatings under Mrs. Perez. Then she was kind of forced out because she wanted a higher position, and that was a no-no for women. And my mom took her place, and my life got so much easier because my mom actually loved the students. Like when she died, her memorial service was overflowing out the church doors. Hundreds and hundreds of people came because she loved the students. She protected us. Like the principal was a real hard ass. He would go through, we all had to line up perfectly straight in a big line before entering the school building after breaks. And he could walk the line and like give demerits just if you looked disrespectful, or he said other principals walk the line with scissors if your hair gets too long. So like he didn't ever cut anyone's hair, but he did send 2 boys. He didn't let them graduate that year because their hair would touch their ears. So it was just very repressive and strict. And then so I'd start the day with 2 demerits. I once got a demerit. I once got 3 demerits because you can also get they can just throw 3 at you. For touching pink insulation that had fallen out of the building. I thought it was cotton candy that had fallen on the floor. Ugh. And and I was like, ooh, cotton candy, and just went to pick it up, and I was like, that's not cotton candy. It's like has glass in it,
It's pokey.
old building. And I didn't, it wasn't ever like the adults are responsible for making your environment safe, for keeping things like pink insulation out of reach of small children. No, it was, you should have known
That was clearly your fault.
That was dangerous.
Yeah.
Here's your detention. And I got in trouble once for, beating someone at tetherball and not being humble enough. I got in trouble once for, well, I don't know if we want to get into this, but I was sexually assaulted by another student, and I was too angry about it afterwards.
Oh, you weren't submissive enough about it.
Like I didn't forgive them correctly, because if I'd forgiven them completely, I would not be so angry. And like I couldn't sit in my chair properly after that. And it's really important that students sit perfectly still and stare at their work and are working. And if you run out of work to do, you're supposed to do extra work or memorize chunks of the Bible. But I couldn't sit in my chair because it felt wrong, because the chair was touching me there.
Yeah.
It was, so I would be like wiggling, and it got more demerits, which got me beatings. And where were the beatings? On my backside.
Right.
Where I had been abused.
Right.
And at one point, this pastor, like I was alone with him in his office, and he bent me over and paddled me for a paddling I had earned, quote unquote. And when I bent over, my mandatory school uniform was this skirt, and my skirt kind of comes up, and it was very like sexually abusive the way it was handled.
Right.
So so just all of this was excused as it's just powerful men over others. And that is a completely biblical idea. I am not saying that they subverted the Bible. It is in the Bible.
Right.
And
they
it
were
is
doing what they believed out of the Bible.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
They did not I don't even think the pastor wanted to be, like, nobody really wanted to beat kids. They just wanted the kids to behave, and they thought they had to.
Right.
Like, and that's me at my most gracious, but like...
Yeah, that's being pretty gracious, yeah.
No one wants to like ruin your life. They
want you to be perfect.
They wanted you to go to heaven. They wanted you to please God. That was the end goal. Even like the founder of ACE has said, it is not our goal to educate a child. It is our, we are not about educating children. We are about making, not making disciples. I forget the exact wording. It's about
saving kids from hell.
Teaching children to love the Lord or to serve the Lord.
At least he gets it.
So, he says, quote unquote, not about education. And I'm like, then don't call yourself Christian education.
Right. At least we agree on that. Jeez.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
So I have to ask you, and I know we're kind of getting short on time, but I didn't want to stop you because this is just so, I mean, it's horrific, but it's compelling. And I think it's so important for it to be told. And I'm so grateful for your courage to finally talk about this publicly, because I do think it comes at a cost to you, I'm sure, and it also can be so beneficial to others. But and I know you've talked about this other part on other shows, but I have to ask you here, like, eventually something clicked with you and you were like, enough is enough. How did you finally get away from this abusive mainstream Christianity?
Right. And I prayed my way out of Christianity, which is the broad answer. But I want to preface that with the abuse didn't get me out. It made me dive deeper into my faith.
Wow.
It wasn't the adverse. Like, I had that was crappy. There's a lot of bright spots in my childhood. There's playing softball. There's playing with my cousins. There's wandering the hills. Like,
sure.
There's so much good about it. The fundamentalism was all bad. And even then, there's some fundamentalists that loved me and cared. But I want to say my deconversion had nothing to do with what people did wrong or right. It had to do with a pursuit of truth. And it started with prayer failing me. And I decided to test prayer for the first time, but I had every belief and every faith that prayer would succeed.
Right.
Because I still believed very strongly that God was real. I just was wondering how prayer worked, because maybe I had it wrong, and I dove into the Bible and no, I had it right. There's contradictory stuff about prayer, but even taking them and comparing scripture with scripture, it is pretty clear. You can like pray for healing. You can pray, you can bother the judge like the widow does.
It's supposed to do stuff.
Yeah, prayer changes things.
Right.
I was told all the time.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so it kind of starts, the big one starts with my daughter when she was born with a severe disability that required multiple major surgeries. And she was the reason I could not stay in the mission field. We had put in an application to be permanent overseas missionaries, my husband and I, in Papua New Guinea, in their Lapilo support place. And then this baby came along, and arthrogryposis looks the worst at birth. It is just, you're pretzeled in on yourself. She was born without calves and shoulder muscles and biceps, and her fingers were bent and stuck, thumb and palm, fingers touching forearms, complete wrist curve. She couldn't lift her arms. She couldn't move. She couldn't kick. All the kick counts I'd been counting had been hiccups. I've never felt my baby kick inside me.
Wow.
And we did 7 ultrasounds. We knew something was up. And we couldn't go overseas at that point. Her disability was so severe. And that's the first time, like, Ron Barnes was my professor that encouraged me to pray 30 to 45 minutes every day in college. And he recently passed away like a couple of weeks ago. He got lost on a hike and died.
Oh.
I'm sure he died praying.
Probably.
And with no one there. But so I tested prayer with my daughter because she had a severe disability, and I prayed that she would walk. I prayed that she would wiggle her finger. I prayed that she had half her face was paralyzed, but only for like a few days. So I prayed that she would smile. I prayed that she would be able to turn her head. Her torticollis was so bad. I prayed that someday she'd be able to like hold my finger. And I guess the first time prayer failed me, the true first time, was when my mom was killed. And I genuinely, 100% in pure faith, James would be proud of me, the biblical James.
Yeah.
Prayed with 100% believing it would happen, pure, unadulterated faith. I can't describe this, how pure this was, that God would raise my mom from the dead. That didn't happen. So
you don't say.
Like Tabitha was raised from the dead, Lazarus was raised from the dead, that boy that the prophet laid on top of him, which was kind of sexual, raised from the dead. But like, and my mom was like amazing and the best Christian ever. And then when I like meekly like kind of told a couple people this is the point where we're all in my living room grieving, and there's people coming over, like pastors and stuff. And I kind of mentioned, let's make sure, I want to see her body, I kept saying. And no one would let me because she was crumpled like a piece of paper. It would have been traumatic. I still think I should have been able to see it. It would have given me a lot of closure. But at this point, I'm asking because I think there's a chance. I don't know if it's good or not. I think there's a chance God raised her from the dead. Because everything I've been taught is that God can do that. And I've prayed in 100% faith, and I can move mountains. And why would I be taught all of this up until this point if it were not true? Why would everything's been preparing me for this moment. My entire faith, all my doctrines, all the theology, all the memorized Bible verses has been preparing me for this prayer. And I did it perfectly. And when I mentioned it and people kind of chuckled or went, "Oh, honey," like it destroyed me. Oh gosh, I'm going to cry. It destroyed me. Goodness, sorry. Didn't cry in the other podcast. You're doubly special. It was like, that's not how prayer works. So that's not how God works. That's never happened, was the message I got. But no, it happened in the Bible. Yeah, but that's the Bible. So I guess that was the first the very, very first time where the Bible had to be separate from reality. And prayer didn't work the way it did in the Bible. So maybe that was the little speck. But when my daughter was born, and the next day the doctor said it's the myoplasma type of arthrogryposis multiplex congenita, which I couldn't pronounce for like the first week. And I kept having him write down, and he was very patient. And I said, will she ever walk? Will she ever stand? And he said, she's very severe. But I can't tell you for sure. But I don't, he didn't think so, but he didn't like dash all my hopes either. Because I just had a C-section and sobbing hurt like the dickens.
Right.
And I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And yeah, and then everyone was praying for her, and I was praying so hard. And that's when I learned my all-powerful God, who uses prayer to change things, had never, ever regrown a limb, never rebuilt a muscular system, never, like she was missing muscle, and the anterior horn cells that develop into muscle had not, and the tissue had calcified. So like you can't even do a muscle transfer in parts of her body. It wouldn't work. There's nothing to connect to.
Huh.
And then I watched everyone around me do the dance they did at the day after my mom was killed. Then all of a sudden prayer that they had preached could change anything. Every time the doctors would show us, like we did a muscle biopsy. Oh, there's no muscle there. Nothing grew there. Prayers became not pray that the muscle's strong, pray that she'll move her arm. It just became pray that she'll accept her disability, that God will use her. Like watching us adjust to reality was the first domino and then every time I had to adjust to reality until I was praying things that would work out naturally every time. And I had a red prayer journal, and I went back to it, and I noticed all my answered prayers, all my praises, were all things that would work out 100% naturally. And so I was going to test prayer with full faith again that God would reveal his power, that God would be real. I believed he was real still. And I just tried praying different ways because I thought I was doing it wrong, because it's always human error because God's perfect. And I was going to pray to a plastic fork, but it was so blasphemous. I couldn't do it. At this point I'm online and if you pray to a candlestick, it will have the same results. And I'm like, no, it can't have the same results. It's because prayer's real and God's real and the God behind it is real. So it must just be how we're doing it wrong, or God's saying no or something. And so I'm going to have the same experience I did with all my praises and prayer requests in my journals and all my life. And so I decided to stop praying entirely because I couldn't pray to something else. It wasn't real, Right. I only prayed to God because he was real. So I stopped praying, and I even told God, I'm going to stop praying, and you are allowed to make my life worse. I know this will make my life worse. And my life got better and better and better because the pressure was off of praying. We went through another surgery of a bunch. And my daughters had all 4 limbs cut and rotated. So they major surgeries. Her knees have had metal plates drilled into them, taken out, drilled back into them. She has permanent pins in her arms. She's had a lot of major surgeries and the best surgery experience. And we have to fly across the country for this surgery, so they're extra stressful. You're flying with a post-op kid, and across 3 airplanes later, you get to the other side of the country to get the specialist. And so the one surgery we didn't pray, I slept. I was more attentive to my daughter. I was, a better parent. And not praying worked so well. I was going to not pray for a year.
Not praying works. That's the quote of the episode. Not praying worked so well.
So well. At 3 months in, I was an atheist.
Wow. You just were like, yep, there's nothing there.
Which I love that as a person who's never taken a science class, not a real one, not really a real one.
Right. You were applying the scientific method.
Yeah, I got to be the little scientist that like like even when in community college I did take like a physical anthropology class, but I did my final paper on creationism and he gave me an A. So like he did not give a crap. Like I was not learning evolution. So like I'm going to take my very, very first real science class tomorrow, but maybe like there's a little hope for the little scientist inside me that that studied the data and wrote down observations and had a hypothesis that turned out to be wrong and changed my mind with the evidence.
Wow. Hallelujah. And how old is your daughter now?
She is 10 now, and she is also an atheist.
Wow. Have I met her? Does she come with you? Yeah, that's what I thought.
The girl in the big leg braces.
Yeah.
The one that would never walk. 5 pediatric orthopedic surgeons told us she'd never walk, and now we fly across the country and he got her walking. So she's walking in full leg braces. She's missing the muscle, but she can swing her hips and
so much power to her. And your husband for going through all of that and just getting your priorities right. I mean, I feel like, to me, as I hear you tell that story, it's, God first, family and whatever and children second. And you looked at the situation and said, no, my daughter's first. I gotta figure this out for her. And if prayer's not getting it done, then I'm going to have to take responsibility for this myself, which you were doing already anyway. And you just said, no, this is what's real. Somehow you were able to break the spell and make the observation that not only is prayer not working, it's holding me back. It's making me less attentive to my child. It's making me stressed out in ways it's already stressful enough to have a child that's so sick and needs so much attention and flying across the country, as you said. And to find, to me, I've never heard anybody say that before, that when they stopped praying, things got better. I guess I'm sure other people have experienced that. I've just never heard anybody say that before, and so profound.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I miss the high. Prayer is a high. And I do remember times where it would calm me down. It was all those times where I hadn't done it yet, or I felt the pressure to do it so I could calm down first. And life's so busy, and yeah, it's completely unnecessary. Like if you're at a baseline, you're at a good level, you don't need like calm music or dark lights or something. You don't need to calm down. You're doing fine. You're at bed at the end of the night and you're like, oh, I've got to pray, I don't know.
So you're at like 8 or 9 years then since you decided it was all a sham.
Yeah, it's been 6 years.
Okay. Yeah, because she was 3 or 4 by the time that those surgeries were finally, you were like, wait, this isn't helping, this is hurting.
Yeah, she had one of her surgeries, the one to cut her legs, not cut her legs off and turn around, but cut the bone and twist it, but like turn her legs around. Her epidural had failed. And she was in so much pain, she was delusional.
Oh, wow.
And we were on like 7 church prayer chains. Like all my missionary contacts were praying. Like the world was praying for her. And that happened. And then it was like, oh, well, God's testing your faith by torturing a 3-year-old. Like,
wow. Yeah.
It was so horrible. And then like other kids who had my daughter's same disability were flying to the same hospital from all over the world. One from Singapore who's Hindu, one was atheist, one was Catholic, and one was pagan, right? And they all have the same disability. And those other kids were at one point all doing better. Like in my estimation, they were all doing better than my daughter. Like their epidurals didn't fail, their surgery, they were doing therapies and they were standing before she was. And I'm like, and they're praying to the wrong gods or to no gods or to the goddesses. And I'm praying to the correct, all-powerful God. Like something's not adding up.
And I know this is...
I didn't know it was bullshit at the time. I didn't know a scientific study had already been done for millions of dollars that had debunked prayer, intercessory prayer, the year before my daughter was born. Or this would have made more sense to me. I was very flabbergasted why prayer was... It let me down. It was
Well, you came to
devastating.
I'm sure it was. And you came to your own conclusions and then found out about the research later. That's
Yeah, much later.
remarkable. And, I don't want to extend this too much longer. And I know this is probably opening up a whole nother can of worms, but just briefly, it sounds like your husband was able to make this kind of transition sort of seamlessly with you. Is that true?
So my husband is an evangelical Christian who goes to church.
Oh, I'm completely wrong.
And he's amazing. He made this transition with me in the ways that he lost his close friends, or his friends are less close. He lost the support of, some family member, my side of the family. He went through the losses and he did nothing wrong. According to Christianity, he did nothing wrong.
Right.
He was like, no, in Corinthians it says, I'm not divorcing her, and our children can still be holy because I'm the believing parent, and all the stuff that the Bible teaches, like, he's doing it right. He still gives his testimony at secular events. He's still he's a Christian, and he just happens to be one that is amazing and wonderful and always learning and tolerant, goes to Sunday assembly with us. We don't go to church with him because of the indoctrination. In Sunday assembly doesn't indoctrinate. They teach kids how to, the other week they took the DNA out of strawberries where they created flying rockets. It's all sciencey, right?
Right.
So that's safe for Christians to go
Actual
to.
education, in other words.
Right. Whereas we've taken our kids to church and it made me really uncomfortable. One service at his former church, they were doing all about how Jesus heals people, and it was a really horrible message. If you have a disability, and both my kids have major disabilities. My son entered our family through adoption. He just happened to have the same major disability as my daughter, which is how we found him.
Uh-huh.
And then at one point we were fostering our foster daughter for a year who had the same severe physical disabilities. They all three had it, and I took them all to church, and the church told them that Jesus could heal them with enough prayer, and that's the last time we went to that church.
Jesus just doesn't give a shit about you. Sorry.
Right. Your whole life is like a consequence of sin, and it's just manifesting differently. We're all sinners. You're just somehow got the manifestation really bad, but Jesus could heal you if you pray hard enough. Or if you pray hard enough, he'll use you better, because prayer is totally a real thing that works and is not, divorced from reality.
Oh, my. Well, Alexis, you have been through it. And I know that, where you stand today is the result of a lot of, your own hard work and the support of a lot of really loving people. But you just exude this strength and confidence, and I'm just so impressed and so grateful for you to just share your story so openly. And I'm really kind of speechless.
And I wanted to thank you for your year without God. Was it on top of my year without prayer? It was just so similar, or I discovered it when I was going through, or right before. I don't know. It meant so much to me at the time that it was like, okay, I'm not the only one doing this. I'm not the only one on this journey. And then, of course, now we have a big Life After God community, and, Facebook's wonderful.
Well, it's, we need each other, because it is, even as secular as our society is becoming, it's still such a minefield out there. And, as you know, I work with students now at the Secular Student Alliance, and not in every part of the country is not the same, but in so many parts of our country, just showing up and saying you don't believe in God, you believe, in what science reveals or what research reveals, and it just is a super controversial thing to say even now in
right.
colleges around the country. So it's we need each other, and we need to support each other and try to spread the good news.
Yeah, right. You don't have to be religious. You're heaven,
There's
heaven
freedom.
and hell have no evidence. There's no evidence. It's all in your head, Like,
Well, and the funny thing is, when I was sort of and of course I didn't experience Christianity as severely as you did, but, part of my upbringing was also like telling the gospel, converting people, winning them to Jesus and all of that. And the message was freedom, that Jesus would bring true freedom. And,
yes.
and the irony is when I did my year without God, there was obviously losses associated with that, but overwhelmingly I felt this sense of freedom. And I suddenly was like, oh man, I feel like I want to bring freedom to others. It's kind of like what I was doing in my ministry all along, but sort of now in the reverse. And I truly don't feel a major compulsion to deconvert people, unless they are experiencing the severity of the abuse that comes along with faith and religion. And in those cases, I might say, you don't have to put up with that. Like, you don't have to submit yourself to that. And it's interesting. It's just interesting that my career was focused on helping people find freedom. And now on the other side, I feel like that's the same. I'm still trying to help people find freedom.
Well, that Bible, the truth did set you free. It set me free.
There are a couple Bible verses that are true.
Yeah, except for the truth there was Jesus, and that wasn't true. But
it was inadvertently true, that text.
Yeah, in its own way. Yeah, I know. When I first deconverted, I have this journal entry that's hilarious, where I'm just like, I'm so naive, and I feel like you start out and you're like, I want other people to experience this. I want other people to same thing when you convert.
Right.
Like you're like this little evangelistic tendencies for a minute. I just wrote this entry like, I can't wait to like I was so convinced like all my friends and my husband and my dad and everyone would like, if I explained it and they found it for themselves, it would like sting a little. And, but then they'd be free and they'd be like, oh man.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for telling us the truth.
Yes.
Funny about that.
If he were the interviewee right now, I'm sure he has some stories about when I first deconverted, like he couldn't even talk to me. Like he'd have to leave the room if it would come up because I was so excited and passionate and like, like, honey,
you wouldn't believe what I just learned.
There's no evidence of this. That's not how humans work, little Alexis. That's not how reality works. This is the like motivated reasoning is a thing, and cognitive bias is a strong thing. And like if you ask my husband today why he's still a Christian, he will be like, because the message works. That works for the world. Like the worldview he has, like makes sense to him. And if I put holes in it, sometimes we have to stop talking because it's uncomfortable and we're not going to agree, and that's okay. But definitely I'm no longer, I don't care. Like I am not, I think at Logical in LA this last time, someone stood up and said, we're atheist evangelists. And I groaned. I'm like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to have to lose their faith. I don't want my husband, like it would be nice if we believed the same things. But we have a pretty incredible marriage, believing different things. And it works because we both value the truth. And if the Bible's true, if God's true, then it will be real. Then you don't have to indoctrinate your kids. So our kids know about Jesus. They know about the gospel. They know about other faiths.
Well, that's big of you. And I think it's tough because when it comes down to our own kids, we want them to be well and we want them to be healthy, both physically, but also mentally. And we think we're right. And so it's just so easy to push what you believe on your kids, whether it's Christianity or the opposite. So I really applaud you. I mean, and I feel like my guess is too, that the strength of your relationship with your husband, even though you have things that hold you and bind you together that are more than just your beliefs about metaphysics or, supernatural things. I mean, you have children, you've fought for your children together, you've built a family together. I mean, these are all things that are transcend, luckily for him, he's the kind of Christian that those things that hold you together are stronger than the things that you have that are different. So that's a credit to him and to you. But I mean, I think especially to him, because I think Christians have an especially hard time with that.
Yes, I think doubly credit goes to him. I think it's easier for me in every way.
Right, because I mean, you're open-minded progressive. Like you think, well, okay, he has a different view than me. I can live with that. But a lot of Christians are like, no, I can't live with that. Like, you have to be going in the same direction as me on this, or a Muslim. I mean, any of the monotheistic faiths. Although Judaism has really evolved nicely, that it has room for even straight-up disbelief. You can be a Reformed Jew and go to synagogue and do all the stuff that they do and not believe in God. But Islam and Christianity have a really hard time with this sort of allowing other people to believe what they want.
Right, yeah.
So,
I reviewed The Atheist Muslim, and I was like, oh man, I wish we could get to that place. But yeah, all the Jewish people I'm super close friends with are all atheists.
Yeah, they don't care.
Not because I sought out only atheist ones. It's just like, I wish I see, like, many moons from now, all religion kind of, it's going to have to. We're in the information age, and like, maybe this is my idealistic. Maybe we'll be on the podcast again in 6 years, and I'll be like, remember when I said that silly thing?
Well, it seems like it's going to polarize. Like, I think humanists will find humanism, and I think there are Christians that are humanistic, and there are Muslims that are humanistic, and I think there's going to be that polarizing where the good folks, according to my worldview, will gravitate to a humanistic version of whatever it is that they were raised with culturally, and then the fundamentalists are going to polarize the other way, as we see happening. And but I agree with you. I think that religion isn't going to go away, and it will either adapt to the truth that it is revealed as time goes by, or it won't, and there'll be these two sort of factions, and who knows where that leads us. But well, Alexis, thank you so much for being so open and sharing so personally from your life, and the journey that you've been on is truly remarkable, and I'm just really grateful for you coming on and sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of The X-Files. And thank you to Alexis Record for spending her Sunday morning recording this conversation with me. To learn more about Life After God and The X-Files, please visit our website at lifeaftergod.org. If you appreciate this show and it adds value to your life, I hope you'll consider supporting the work I'm doing by visiting my Patreon page at patreon.com/lifeaftergod and making a monthly recurring donation of any size to support the production of this show. Please tune in 2 weeks for the next episode, my conversation with author Jessica Wilbanks. Until then, I'm your host, Ryan Bell, and this has been The X-Files, Stories of Life After God.